Welcome to The Explainer. When we talk about cybersecurity, our minds usually jump to things like firewalls, encryption, all the high-tech stuff. But what if the single biggest threat isn't a piece of code, but, well, us?
All right, so let's just cut to the chase with a really important question. When you think about all the things that can go wrong online, what is the one single factor that we always seem to overlook?
Yeah, it's the person staring right back at the screen. The one who clicks the link, who picks the password, who decides what to share. It's you. And it's me. And this creates a really interesting situation, right? Because on one hand, we humans are actually the best line of defense. We can spot things that feel off in a way that software just can't. But, and this is the big but, we're also the weakest link in the chain if the systems we use aren't built with our habits and our limitations in mind.
So to really get why this is such a huge deal, you got to understand that online security is a whole different beast compared to security in the real world. I mean, the rules are just completely different.
Think about it. In the real world, you've got police, you've got locks on your doors, you've got laws everyone generally follows. But online, it's pretty much the Wild West. There's no sheriff, social rules get bent out of shape all the time, and because you can be anonymous, it's a playground for people who want to cause trouble.
And this online Wild West throws up some really weird, unique problems. Like you've got these cyber ripples, where something you posted years ago and totally forgot about can suddenly pop back up and become a huge problem today. And who's in charge? The closest thing we have to police are often just volunteer moderators on a forum. It's a chaotic place.
So with all this chaos, it really makes you wonder, right? If there's no real police force and the rules are constantly changing, then who is actually responsible for keeping us safe out there?
Well, the answer might not be what you think. It's not about building bigger, badder firewalls. It's actually about completely rethinking how we design things in the first place.
What we really need is something called a user-centered approach. And that's just a fancy way of saying that instead of building some super complex security system and then just hoping people can figure it out, we need to start by understanding people first. What do they need? What are their habits? What are their limits? And then we build the system to fit them, not the other way around.
And let's be honest, way too often things are done the wrong way. The user is basically an afterthought. But the right way? The user-centered way, it just flips that whole script. You start with the human and you design everything around them.
Okay, so what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, we can actually borrow a blueprint from physical security. It's called a macroergonomic framework, which I know sounds super complicated, but it's really just a fancy term for looking at the big picture.
Basically, it's about seeing security as a whole system. You've got the tech, sure, but you also have the people using it, the situation they're in, the rules they're supposed to follow. All of it works together. You can't just look at one piece in isolation.
All right, check this out. Here we can see that big picture framework in action. On the left, you've got the blueprint for physical security. Think of a place like an airport. And on the right, that same blueprint has been tweaked for cybersecurity. Now, pay close attention to that box at the very top, because there's one small change that means a huge deal.
See, in the physical world, that box says organizational factors. That means you've got formal security teams with managers, training, clear rules, the whole shebang. But in the cyber world, it's been replaced with service provider factors. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but it is a massive, massive shift. All that responsibility moves from one single trained security force to this scattered network of different companies. And ultimately, it trickles down to us, the users.
Okay, so this huge shift in who's responsible makes it absolutely critical to understand the people who are now effectively on the front lines. So if knowing the user is the secret sauce, then how do designers and researchers actually do it? How do they figure us out?
Well, they have a whole toolkit of methods they use, often called human factors methods. It can be anything from sending out big surveys and questionnaires to get a broad idea, to really deep, detailed studies where they literally just watch people to see how they actually use a piece of software or complete a task.
And one of the coolest, most powerful tools they use is something called a user persona. So after they've gathered all this data, they basically create a fictional character, almost like a character in a book, who represents a whole group of real users. It's a way to take all those numbers and statistics and turn them into a real, relatable person.
A persona isn't just a boring list of stats, right? It's a story. So instead of a designer reading a report that says 20% of users over 55 are vulnerable to phishing, they get introduced to Malcolm.
And suddenly, they're not just designing for a faceless statistic anymore, they're designing to protect an actual person. And for someone like Malcolm, maybe that means making the warning labels on sketchy emails bigger and brighter. Or maybe it means creating a super simple one-click button to report a scam. It takes an abstract problem and makes it a concrete, human problem to solve.
And when you boil it all down, what does this all lead to? It leads to the most important and maybe the most fragile thing we need for a safe internet: trust. A user-centered approach isn't just about usability. It's about building trust right into the design from the very beginning.
But here's the thing. Trust isn't simple. It's not just one thing. It's this complex dance between a whole bunch of different factors. You've got how transparent the service provider is, right? But then you also have the user's own personality and past experiences. And then there's the tools themselves. Are they easy to use? And even the overall vibe of the environment. All of these pieces have to click together perfectly to build real trust.
And that brings us full circle right back to where we started. Technology by itself is never going to be the whole answer. You can have the most advanced firewall on the planet, but it doesn't mean a thing if someone can be tricked into just turning it off. If we're ever going to build a digital world that's actually safe, we absolutely have to start by understanding the people in it.
So let me leave you with this to think about. Just imagine for a second, what if the internet was different? What if every single app, every website, every security pop-up you ever saw was actually designed specifically with you in mind, with a real understanding of your needs, your habits, even your frustrations? How much safer would that feel? What would change for you? Because that is the future that this whole user-centered approach is aiming for.